All right. So the first thing we would like to do is take a moment to reflect on this quote from the book Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. And I'm just going to read it out loud so that we can get centered and arrive at this jumping off place together. Teachers are the professionals most responsible and most intimately involved with grading our students, and therefore are in the most powerful position to make grading practices more equitable. Would anyone like to make a comment? You may do so in the chat or out loud, whatever you would like. Nope, we're just pondering. Oh, good. Yeah, I think that's something helpful for us to remember right now because there are so many things that are so completely out of our control at this precise moment. This is something that we are in control of and that we can do better at and have the capacity to change. So our presentation today is broken into 3 different parts. And the first part is the web of belief. And this is my part. And what I want to talk about is why is it so hard to talk about grades? Because those of you who have engaged in these discussions before know that it is hard to talk about grades. Your web of belief is a complex system of what we think is true according to our knowledge and understanding and experience in the world. And then we put together a web in our psyche of how all those ideas and experiences are interconnected. And so everybody's web of belief is just a little bit different. And that was a term coined by somebody named Quinn in 1978, but somehow it still works, even though everything in the world has changed. So we're going to have a first breakout about what do I believe. I'm just going to send you into random breakouts, and you're going to be in the same breakouts throughout the session so you can build relationships. So we're going to talk about what do we believe about students, about teachers, about teaching, right? How does that inform our web of belief? And we're going to use this little protocol called Pass the Mic, where the person with the fewest letters in their name goes first, and the person with the most letters is the timekeeper, helping keep everyone on track. And you're going to introduce yourself and where you teach. You're going to try to not talk for more than 2 minutes apiece because we don't have very long. And then at the end of your thing, you say, I'm passing the mic to, and then you read somebody else's name off the screen. And the prompt is, how does your web of belief about students teaching and learning influence your grading policies? All right, so as we learn new ideas, let us be open and humble and honest and forgive ourselves if we weren't aware things couldn't be different. Perhaps we've never had a reason, an opportunity, or a mechanism to question grading, and now is our chance. All right, with that inspiring speech, now I'm going to talk about, very quickly, the history of grades and how did we get here. So our 20th century context was when we started moving from agrarian societies, communities to industrialized communities. We had different needs, right? We needed to educate a workforce and prepare them for manual labor. And so if you look at the similarities between this picture and this picture, you can see those priorities reflected in the setup of both of those places. So the individualization of the one-room schoolhouse went away, and it ceded to the assembly line where everyone is just a cog in a machine. So the families moved from farms, the student population increased, and with that became all kinds of different necessities around behaviorism, because now we have a bunch of kids in one place who we don't know and who are not part of our immediate community. So we have to start establishing rules for behavior, and the rules for behavior that will translate into the job market are punctuality, regularity, attention, silence, all of which add up to compliance. So here's a little graphic organizer about the 20th versus the 21st century beliefs, right? In the 20th century, the education was driven by IQ testing, and there were some very questionable racist views of how kids would be capable of different things based on their heritage, based on their race. And so obviously we know now that white supremacy led to a whole bunch of things that we didn't plan on before. But that belief that only some students can meet academic standards, like as a genetic mandate, that is something that was the driving force. And they thought that we should sort students by ability, and so they could be placed in the right jobs when they were done with schooling. And they also thought that extrinsic motivation, like punishments and punitive measures, they produced desired behaviors. But we know now that they don't, right? We know now that all students are capable of meeting academic standards. We know that schools should not be in the business of sorting students or tracking them. And we know that extrinsic motivation is not the most effective means of influencing behaviors. And I think all of us know that because we are the products of a puritanical society, right? That says if you don't do this, you will be punished and shamed in front of your fellows and put to jail, maybe. So now we're going to move on to the next part, which is why change. So now that we're in a place where we're ready to grow and think and interact, how do traditional grading practices inhibit student growth? Carla, I'm going to pass the ball to you.
It's actually Teresa, sorry.
Okay, Teresa.
And Carla's going to pass it to me. So in this last part with the time that we have left, we're going to look at hopefully 3 different sort of segments of how our traditional grading practices, some of the ideas behind them and why they open up a lot of opportunity for change. So this first one is a quote, just something that a student might say about making mistakes in the classroom and how that makes them feel. So you can kind of read that as I set an anchor for our next breakout room session here. And thinking that, and we think about a classroom, one of the most powerful influences that we can have on student achievement is a positive teacher-student relationship. And we know this from John Hattie's research. It has a huge effect size. And in order to create a positive teacher-student relationship, it's not just about the conversations that we have with the kids. But one of the ways we do that is our grading practices with our students. And a lot of times our grading practices send the message, the opposite message of what we really are thinking. So we want to send the message that we care, we're helpful, we're here for you, but our grading practices are sending the message that mistakes are unwanted, that we're unhelpful, things are punished. Everything in a classroom tends to be graded, which basically indicates to a student that you're being judged all the time and you always have to have your best performance and there's absolutely no room for mistakes. So we want to begin to think about what our grading practices do and how they may be sending this message to our students when that's really not the message that we want to. So we're going to send you back to breakout rooms for 5 minutes. And your prompt in this one, and we're asking that each of you just within your groups, I know the groups are different sizes, so if you could watch that timer or have a timekeeper to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. Your prompt for this session is, how might my grading practices stifle risk-taking and trust between me and my students? How might your grading practices be hampering the teacher-student relationship that you would actually like to see?
Okay, I think we're all back.
All right. So I know, I just kind of want to preface before we do a share out here that I know these chats are probably not nearly long enough for a conversation about standards-based grading and grades. But we want to make sure that the purpose of today's session was really just to get the conversations going, to possibly build a network. And we will share at the end of our session today some other opportunities to continue the conversations. And you're also always willing to reach out to any of us or the people you're meeting today to continue these conversations. So I wanted to ask if there was maybe a couple of people who are willing to unmute themselves and share out a highlight, an aha, a challenge that they may have seen in your breakout rooms that the rest of us could possibly learn from.
I think I can share from our group that grades are really different than feedback. And if we want students to improve, they have to have the opportunity to make mistakes and get feedback and have strategies and opportunities to improve.
I like that. Thank you, Andrew. And I really like the idea of the strategies. We have to provide our kids with the strategies if we're going to offer them those opportunities. So I see it looks like Ella, I don't know if that's your whole name. It's blocked off with your hands, but
it's Ella Kari.
Ella Kari, thank you.
Ella Kari. So I think one of the points we made is that grades also represent a relationship with parents, and that our parents are coming to grading with as many preconceived ideas and misunderstanding, and especially since grades mean a different thing to each teacher. And so anyway, that just complicates it, and that students have particular relationships with grades as well, and that all of those are iterative relationships.
Thank you, Ella Kari. How about one more?
Real quickly, just our group also talked about the importance of timely feedback, letting papers grade, stack up and then not getting the grades back to the students, even, in a timely manner so they can learn from their mistakes prior to an assessment. So making sure that we're grading in a timely manner so that they actually see the value in doing the work and can learn from the mistakes. I think Andrew mentioned that. So that was kind of the key takeaway from our group.
Thank you. We appreciate you guys sharing out, and I am now actually going to pass it back to Carla, and she's going to talk about another way or issue with possibly changing our grades.
So I'm sure you're reading all the little comments there. One of the things we do as teachers is we give points for assignments, we give points for tests and quizzes, we give points for projects, and sometimes we give points for behaviors. And so managing behaviors, getting the kids to do what we want them to do. So if we don't want them to get a hand in late work, we take points off. If we want to make sure their names are on their papers, all for good reasons, we're going to give them points if they do that. And so kids pick this up very early, and then they get into a cycle where you hear them saying things like, how many points is this worth? And what do I need to do to get an A? And even behaviorally, they've figured it out. Hey, I'll clean your desks if you give me extra points, which, as a teacher, I'm not afraid of having kids clean the room. But the question becomes, are we grading their understanding of the content, or are we grading their behaviors? Are we assigning points for learning and standards, or are we assigning points for compliance? And so it tends to become a whole currency of points in motivating students, a full-blown economic system of incentives and penalties. And this is really to assume that extrinsic motivation, this system of rewards and consequences that we give, is the most effective way to not only get the behaviors we want, but also to promote learning. And so there are decades of research that do show extrinsic motivation really only yields benefits for menial and repetitive tasks, but are not effective to engage our students in higher order and creative thinking tasks. And so I want you to go to breakouts thinking about this question. Also, again, pass the mic protocol. How might my grading practices create a system of points as currency? Whether I meant to do that or not, is there any places where it feels like students are like using points as bargaining chips, or I'm using points to sort of manipulate behaviors? Wonderful. Okay, so as Teresa did on the last one, I want to open up the space and allow anyone who'd like to make a comment. Probably you're not going to talk about your own grading practices because I'm sure you don't do this, but maybe there was a teacher in your past or in another school or somewhere that you ran across that you were like, I wonder why they're doing that with those points. So if anybody wants to comment about something you learned from your breakouts, or maybe something you think, I will avoid that from now on, and would like to unmute and share, I'm going to open the space for you to do that.
I'll go ahead and share. I have done like an overhaul on my grading system. I teach nutrition, so I have 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And I no longer do zeros. And so the engagement is better. And then I don't have students requesting extra credit at the end of the semester because they're allowed to resubmit work. So instead, kids are asking me, hey, is it okay if I try this assignment again? Which I think as teachers, we can all be like, yes, please do it again. Like, that's what I wanted you to do. So it's definitely taken. Extra credit isn't really something my students even talk about anymore. And that's including the ones that are like, I want 100%. I want like that perfection kind of thing. It's lessened that as well.
So your grading practices are actually getting the kids engaged in the learning more than just the point chasing.
Exactly.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Anyone else?
So I also do a 0-0 policy, giving everybody 50% if they don't do it, because there's no way to dig out if you give them a 0, 1 or 2, and they're done. They failed. Hey, David, I see you. Hi. Sorry, people. I started giving a periodic extra credit for writing. I have a subscription to GimKit and GimKit Inc. I'm in the preliminary, so they will get periodic. You can write anonymously and publish your stuff using GimKit, and that will give them some extra credit, but I won't do it very often. And there's a window. It's like I opened it, it's 2 weeks later, it's closed. If you wanted to do it, do it. Otherwise, I'm sorry you missed that option. Watch for another one to come up. But I don't think that I don't use points as like a way to get kids where they're going. That's silly. They can redo any assignment that they graded less than 70. You can turn it in again, try again. And they can have 3 weeks to do an assignment. I don't do a penalty for late work because I'm not really grading their punctuality. I'm grading their ability to write. So,
wonderful. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So giving kids multiple opportunities, not allowing 0 to drag them into a hole that they can't get out of. That's wonderful. All right, let's go ahead on to the next one, Marissa. So here is a very nice fancy chart, but really it's just a story of 2 students. And so we have Tangela on the left and Isabel on the right, and the teacher that's grading them has categories and weights, as you can see, for participation, classwork, and so on. But let's really talk about the students themselves. First of all, Tangela is a really what you might call teacher's dream student. She's kind, she's helpful, she's a great teammate, she's a friend to her classmates, she's the first one to volunteer, and she's always a leader in group work. On the other hand, she struggles academically and performs poorly on summative tests and projects, as you can see from her grades in the chart. Then we have Isabel, who really is what you would call a reluctant participant, generally has an unpleasant attitude towards the teacher and the class, doesn't really complete homework, is reluctant to even complete classwork, doesn't like to participate in the way that the teacher might perceive as positive. But she clearly understands the course content based on the scores she receives on tests and projects. But as you can see from the way the numbers rolled out, for these 2 very different students, they ended up with the exact same percentage. And so this just highlights one of the issues with grades, and that is when you roll everything into a single grade, behaviors like participation and academic work like test projects, maybe even homework, it hides information. It's hard to extract what does a 76% mean? What standards does this student know? What standards does a student not know? And so that's one of the 3 faults that we'll see on the next slide. Click forward, thank you. The hiding of information. So one grade, a single grade that combines knowledge and behavior, really doesn't tell me much about the student, about what they know or what they can do. The participation and effort categories actually invite implicit bias to come in, because what I perceive as helpful or participation might look different for another teacher. They might think of it differently. And so there's just a lot of room for bias in that. And really, in the end, it, I think, results in what Joe Feldman actually called teachers creating grade hacks. And what he meant by that was, for a student like Tangela, who, you know, is such a wonderful student, so helpful and kind, but kind of struggles academically, that teacher might want to bump up that 76 to an 80%, because she feels like, well, she's really a B student. She's so nice. She's so helpful. She's so kind. And maybe for Isabel, who's not as kind or not as great attitude, if you would, she might say, well, I want to bump that down to a D, because that student really isn't doing well. And so you can also see the bias in that. So these grade hacks are listed there: dropping low scores, selectively averaging certain things and not other things, providing extra credit, giving points or grades for non-academic tasks, and also the curving and bumping of scores. And so we'll have another breakout where you're going to talk about how might this combining of behavioral, academic, and grade adjusting mechanisms, how can this be problematic for your students? How can it be problematic for you?
All right, so as we wind down our time here together, we have about 4 minutes left. We just want to reiterate the idea that the session's purpose today was really to get the conversations going and to help you feel more comfortable in this idea of talking about grading, to not feel bad about your grading or anything that you're doing, because we've all been there. We don't know what we don't know. And the last kind of thing to think about that we want to sort of send you off with is this idea of grades being demotivating or disempowering our students. And the idea when we hear a kid say, I'm a D student in math, or I'm a F student in English, or those kinds of things, how they attribute their grades to who they are, as opposed to attributing them to their learning. And this idea kind of comes as a culmination of all the other 3 faults that you've had a chance to talk about in your breakout rooms. And this idea, Carla kind of touched on it, that grades don't really motivate students to learn, because grades are what we call a performance goal. And if you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work with growth and fixed mindset, what really motivates our students, or people in general, are performance goals. So we are more motivated by the idea of feedback and knowing what we did wrong and how to get better at something than we are about the A or the B. And that kind of pushes kids to work towards getting the grade as opposed to acquiring the knowledge. And that's really not, as educators, that's really not where we want our students to be. So we put this quote in there. This is straight from Feldman's book, that I kind of wanted to leave you as a thought of that. It says, imagine getting a new job and being told you will be evaluated on every task by different supervisors with different approaches, and evaluation scores will be combined in formula unique to each supervisor. And the stress that would cause. And that's kind of the position that we put our kids in every day, especially at the middle school and high school level, where they have 6 or 7 different teachers. And every teacher grades differently, and every teacher has different expectations. And we expect their poor little minds to just keep up with all of that. And then we can't figure out why they're not working for us or they're not doing this. So it's really important that we begin these conversations. And it sounds like in some of the share outs, you guys, some of you are already taking steps in the right direction. We all, as a group who planned this session and are working on these discussions in the district, recognize this is a massive issue, a huge overhaul to the way of thinking and a change in our beliefs. So this is not going to happen overnight. So just think about the places you can start small. So on that note, we want to leave you with the same quote that we started with. Teachers are the professionals most responsible and most intimately involved with grading our students, and therefore are in the most powerful position to make grading practices more equitable. So we want you to think about how you can use your power to making grading practices more equitable and what you can do to begin those conversations. Here are all of our email addresses who were involved in this presentation today. Please reach out to any of us, and we can get information or questions answered. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see some future PD opportunities that Marissa Bannerman is presenting. The Wednesday, February 10th one is a presentation she has done before, so you may have seen it. And then March 10th is an ELA-specific standards-based grading presentation. So we thank you all for joining us after a long day. We so value your time. And if anybody wants to stick around and ask any questions, we'll be happy to do so. Otherwise, have a great evening.
And also one last thing as you're leaving, we will be doing 2 more sessions in the March and April TLF Summits. So we will be shifting more towards okay, so if this doesn't work, then what will work and what can we do now? So looking forward to those sessions.